Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me today to finish up our four-part series of community accountability. For this fourth part, we're going to be talking about fostering community growth and resilience. And this has been a four-part series put on in collaboration with the National Survivor Network, which is a program of CAST, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. Again, my name is Rebecca Layton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am at the tail end of a master's degree in restorative justice. If you missed the previous parts, you're welcome to go back and catch those either on the NSN's website in the resources area, or you can go to the NSN's YouTube channel. So today what we're going to be talking about is kind of wrapping up what we discussed in our first few parts and doing kind of a little bit of recap and then like a what now, what do we do now with this information? So first we're going to start with a little bit of calling all into the work together. And then we're going to talk a little bit about resiliency and what resiliency is or looks like. And then we're going to talk about what collective resistance and resilience could look like. And then we're going to do a little bit of a consider and what do we do next? And then we're going to take some time for gratitude for each other, gratitude for community, gratitude for the space. So I want to kind of go two different ways with this. I'm going to start with a quote by Mimi Kim from Moving Beyond Critique. And the website is right there if you want to look up this piece of work. It's really fabulous. But Mimi says that abundant perils and paradoxes stand in the way of recentering community spaces that have been fragmented by individualism and competition, organized through persistently unequal power relations, and increasingly plagued by material realities of poverty, surveillance, and pervasive violence. Now, I kind of want to let this just sink in a little bit. Kind of talking about this poverty, surveillance, and violence, and kind of the cycle, right, of poverty and violence and power dynamics and our relationship with power dynamics combined with individualism and competition. Like those are what really stand out to me in this. And so I think it kind of has a lot to do with some of the things we've been talking about up until now. And, some of the things that we've been conditioned in society to do it, to go it alone, do it alone, be in competition instead of working together and really creating collective action. And keeping in mind all these kind of power dynamics, like we really have to break down what society has done and told us and do a lot of reflection on that, but also not allow it to keep us paralyzed from dreaming and imagining and looking to the future. And that's where I kind of call this the calling into the work, because it's a call to action. Like identify the problem and then figure out how we're going to solve it together. Right. And again, building on collective knowledge that we've learned from other communities and other folks who've been doing this work or adjacent work for a really long time. And so I kind of want to bring it into this, now what do we do with this information? And so I want to quote Adrienne Maree Brown from We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. Adrienne says, I know that ending harm may be far off yet, even unimaginable. But I also believe that the future is already alive in each of us, because all the generations to come live within the bodies, cultures, dreams, and shaping of those alive today. So I want to invite you all and us together in this talk to really kind of bring these two things in, right? Acknowledging the power dynamics and the struggle, but also acknowledging that there is seeds that have been placed and seeds that are continuing to be placed. And what do we do with that? And how do we grow deep roots in this work? So I like this diagram for a few reasons. One, it does talk about all the different components that are really needed to be focused on in order to have resilient individuals and resilient communities, but also like it's a cycle, right? And a lot of these intersect with each other, and when one falls apart, another may fall apart. So I think it's really important if we're talking about resiliency, especially within community accountability, we have to acknowledge all of the aspects that need to kind of fall in line. And for many of us, if we're coming from a place of survival, resilience can seem really, really far out of reach. And it's really hard to thrive when we're living in a constant state of survival. So we need to take into consideration the spiritual, physical, and emotional. We also need to take in consideration the emotional, environmental, and financial, and then also the financial, occupational, and social. And then again, I see this cycle of social, intellectual, and spiritual. And a lot of these intersect with each other. Like I said, someone's financial situation can really impact their environment, which can impact their emotional health and then spiral into their physical, spiritual, and other spaces. But also financial is very much indicative of what our occupations are, right? If we have access to employment within spaces that allow us to have a living wage, and our financial situation is more stable, then our environmental, emotional, physical well-being will be better, and so will our status within the social context, unfortunately, because of those power dynamics. And so these all really intersect, right? And so if our social status starts to increase or decrease, that can very much impact our intellectual and spiritual well-being. It can impact our financial well-being. It all is very much interconnected. And so we have to really keep an eye on how not only ourselves are doing within all of these fields, but also how's the rest of our community, right? And really making an effort not to let people fall behind if we can do anything to avoid that, right? And creating more structures and systems and breaking down some of those norms so that way we can support each other to be independent and to be fruitful and resilient, but also to be resilient as a community. So community resilience takes in some of the components from the previous image, but it gets more complex. And so one of the things I really like about this is the tree, right? And the idea that if the roots of the tree are really strong, then the tree and the branches and everything else will continue to grow and be resilient. There's often, there's quotes about the tree that bends in the wind doesn't break, right? And some other quotes. And so I think that this is a really good way to kind of go about looking at, if we were to go back to the other slide, some of this intersection of how all this works, and then moving forward and looking at how all these components. So community resilience looks like, it says safe and stable neighborhoods, right? One of the things that comes to mind for me is safe and stable neighborhoods is not just a safety thing physically, but it's also emotionally safe. It's non-violent spaces, but also communities that have the resources and the ability to thrive, so that when there is some pressure, they can kind of rely on each other, right? We see in communities that really struggle, their schools struggle and their students struggle. And then there's more, and there are a lot of studies linking that to increased violence, right? The cycle of poverty and violence is really, really apparent in research across fields. And then community advocacy and agency. So the community standing in for each other and being accountable for each other, and also having agency to make communal decisions. Access to capital kind of goes along with the safe and stable neighborhoods. Healthy and supported individuals and families goes along with the social and economic mobility. Environmental or environments that promote social connectedness, right? So while these are all very specific things, they're all very reliant upon each other. And so, again, it's hard to have a safe and stable neighborhood if the social or economic mobility faces a lot of barriers. And it's hard to be healthy when you're living in a constant state of survival. And then at the bottom arc of this tree, it says equitable and trauma-informed systems and supports. We see restorative justice, we see healthy promoting infrastructure, we see affordable housing, fair policing practices, equity-based school financing, living wages, integrated social services, fair landing practices, community-driven policy, right? So you have what you need at the top of the tree and what the outcomes are. The outcomes, the fruits of the tree, are the safe and stable neighborhoods, the social and economic mobility, access to capital, healthy supported individuals, and so on, is very much dependent on what's happening below the surface of the tree. Is there affordable housing? Is there fair landing practices? Do we have living wages? Do we have restorative practices? Do we have health infrastructure? And this is really adapted from Center for Community Resilience. So taking all of that kind of discussion in mind, right, especially building on what we've been talking about up until this session about community accountability, I think it's really important for us to just kind of take some time to think. I didn't want to throw a whole ton of new information out in this last part. Instead, I'd really like to make it be this kind of recap of everything we've really talked about. And then now what do we do with that knowledge, right? What do we do with the conversation we've been having? Because everything starts with a conversation, but then what do you do with it, right? I think we can't be accountable to ourselves and to our community if we have these discussions and then we never do anything with it. And that can be a really hard place to be in. Like, how do we do? What do we do? Now what? Right. And so some of the questions that I kind of came to mind for myself, even just reflecting on some of what we've been talking about in our previous recorded sessions, as well as our member-led discussions. And the questions that I kind of came out with was, am I supporting self and community? Or am I encouraging toxic positivity? And I felt like that was a really important thing to bring up, because we can talk all day long about all the possibilities that we see for, the future of the anti-trafficking movement and survivor-led movements, as well as other adjacent nonviolent spaces and community building spaces. It can be really easy to get swept up in this ideas and dreams without considering the realities that people are facing. And so there's a big difference, a big shift between being positive while acknowledging the complexities and the barriers that different folks might be facing that might make it more complex to do some of these things that we really want to see happen. And it can be easy to kind of fall into this chin up, bootstraps, all those things that we've been hearing for a long time. Like, you can do anything that you put your mind to, some of those kinds of things. And so it's, how do we show up for community and be resilient while also acknowledging and validating people's real life struggles, right? And things that might be getting in the way. And then I think once we ask ourselves these questions on how are we facing resiliency? How are we trying to build these foundations of communities that support and love and doing these things out of really idealistic ideologies? But how do we do those in a positive way that's not discounting people's real life situations as well? And I think that can be a hard balance to find. And that's a part of us being accountable, continuing to be accountable to each other in the community. And so then we follow up. We follow up with how things are going, because needs shift. Sometimes what we needed in the beginning and the boundaries, like we talked about in our previous discussion, sometimes those boundaries shift based off of the environment. Maybe the environment has gotten to a place where some of those boundaries can be altered or changed, or maybe be out of the way altogether, or maybe they need to be stronger, right? It can shift both ways. There's different ways in which it could go. And so I think taking time to follow up and addressing any needs that do need to shift. And in that shifting, we reframe, right? We can reframe, accept, and then let go. And this is used oftentimes in some trauma recovery spaces as well, right? Like we see the trauma, we reframe it because, you know, maybe there's somebody blames themselves for getting into a situation or for being harmed. And so reframing it to say, you know what, it is okay to be upset that this thing happened to you, but it's also not your fault. And then we accept those things and then we let it go. And I don't mean let it go like forgive and forget. It's more so I see the thing, I'm processing the thing, and then I'm letting it go. Sometimes that's letting a person go. Sometimes that's letting a want or a need go. Sometimes it's letting certain things go, right? And it's can be like a I give you peace and I send you off into the world, or it can be I no longer have to be paralyzed by this thing that happened to me, or it can be I've been hurt in communities before, but I'm going to reframe how I see community. I'm going to accept that this community is really trying to be there for me, and I'm going to let go of some of those fears. This reframe, accept, and let go could be done in many different ways, but I think that that's a really good way for us to tangibly and, you know, actively follow up with how we've been in community and how we're doing and how we're being accountable. That also, I think, is how we build the resilience, right? That's how we get through maybe bumps in the road. And then one of the things that I wanted to talk about was kind of this cultivating collective resistance and resilience through unlearning of oppression. And I think this is how we get to a place of thriving instead of just surviving, right? Like we can call to action these movements and want survivors to be in leadership positions and to drive the movement, but we can't do that unless we unlearn oppression within ourselves, as well as being resistant against oppression externally, right? And so you know, if we've been taught to always act a certain way, but it's really the oppressor who gains from us acting in a certain way, then that's where we start unlearning. And you know, we have in our, you know, in our head we have our thoughts and the way that we think through things. In our heart is where we really process and feel. And this is how we can, and I think it's a matter of like in Navajo peacekeeping, for example, there's a lot of talk around moving from the head to the heart. And the way that I see kind of that same kind of an idea for us is like moving from this place of just thinking through the things is going into the heart of the collective and working together as a community. And really approaching, evaluating what we need to unlearn and what we need to relearn through a place of empathy as well. Because again, we have to remember that not everybody is ready to deconstruct some of the things within oppression that really keep poverty and community violence and the breaking down of community very real. So I see resilience within this space of our community accountability talk as, you know, moving about like from our head to our heart, but also evaluating through a place of empathy. And then this quote by Adrienne Maree Brown as well, from the same piece of work, We Will Not Cancel Us, says, I can see it in the short term. We generate small pockets of movement so irresistibly accountable that people who don't even know what a movement is coming, don't even know what a movement is, come running towards us, expecting that they will be welcomed, flawed, and whole. by a community committed to growth. Knowing that there is a place in this violent, punitive world that is committed to and practicing a healing and transformative iteration of justice. I'll read it one more time because I think this one is like a really good way for us to start moving into an ending of this discussion and really moving into a place of gratitude and commitment to be accountable in our future. So again, Adrienne says, I can see it. In the short term, we generate small pockets of movement so irresistibly accountable that people who don't even know what a movement is come running towards us, expecting that they will be welcomed, flawed and whole, by a community committed to growth. Knowing that there is a place in this violent and punitive world that is committed to and practicing a healing, transformative iteration of justice. So I want to end our 4-part series talking about gratitude. And for some people, gratitude might just be like, oh, thank you. But gratitude is really more of an internal practice that exudes externally, if that kind of makes sense. And it goes hand in hand with a lot of what we've been talking about addressing harm within community and really holding people in a place of love. So this is collective research, but I really liked this diagram out of USU. It says the research shows cultivating gratitude can help you and others be happier through experiencing greater life satisfaction or having less symptoms of depression and anxiety. It says it can help you and others have more energy to engage in healthy activities, sleep longer, wake up refreshed. And I know that those sound like very specific, but if I think about it from more of this idea of a community, like when we resource ourselves, we can resource the community. If we come in under-resourced, then the whole community suffers and constrain. And so that's when we step up for people when they need it, and then people step up for others when they need it, right? As long as there's this healthy give and take, right? And how do we come into space with gratitude and with acknowledgement, and how do we lift others up and not leave people behind? It helps with being more resilient. It helps with having stronger relationships, like feeling more loved and supported, committed and satisfied, feeling more valued. Boosts motivation and performance. We work harder and we feel more fulfilled, identify and solve problems better, and builds character to be more likely to offer help, be more trusting and trustworthy. So, again, this is what USU considers to be the scientific benefits of cultivating and expressing gratitude. And so I really kind of just want to bring us into this space of inviting everyone to give gratitude to each other, give gratitude to the research and the really important work that others have already been doing within these spaces and in adjacent spaces. Having gratitude for ourselves, having gratitude for the community around us, having gratitude for those within our network who have really worked to cultivate and to lead and to reach back and grab others and bring them along with them. And I just think that this is where we start really getting to know and acknowledge what each of us, what strengths we bring and what strengths others bring, and how do we lift each other up, right? And how do we overcome barriers together, and how do we address harm together, and really embracing the individualism of each person as they come into community and into space with each other, but also having gratitude for this really unique community that we've been growing, right? And this movement that we really see being changing for a lot of survivors and others that we're bringing into this space. So with that, I give gratitude to each of you. I thank you all so much for being here. I thank you all for having me and for participating in this 4-part series along with me in this conversation and our ability to learn and grow together. And thank you to the NSN for bringing me in. And I really look forward to our membership discussion and just continuing to grow with you all and to learn and just to see what can come. Thank you and blessings.